do you ever get tired of having to deal with someone else's chronic illness? Because obviously these questions were directed at, the caregiver, the people that have to help, on the sidelines. Then this second question is, how do you cope with your own feelings regarding your loved one's type 1 diabetes? And then the third was, do you separate the person from the disease, or are they intertwined in your mind? And they were all really good questions, especially as a caregiver. It makes you definitely consider things that sometimes I think you get lost in just doing it. And as a parent, my responsibility might be different than the husband's responsibilities, because you have a wife that grew up with it, kind of knows how she feels. She can tell you for the most part, I assume. Correct me if I'm wrong, ladies. But at least what I see from my father-in-law, he kind of does his own thing. And my mother-in-law cooks for him and makes sure that there's good options around. But for the most part, unless there's an issue, he kind of manages his own diabetes, and he makes his own choices of foods. If he chooses to pile his plate full of, mashed potatoes versus broccoli, she provides the good food, but he makes his own plate. Whereas with me, I'm doing every single thing. I'm like, nope, you have to have more broccoli. Nope, you need to skip this, or you need to just have glucose, no cookie. I don't want you spiking. So my daily is more hands-on, I think, with a diabetic than what you women would get from your husbands. So it's definitely different. And a lot of you women probably know like how your mom feels. That's that's what I do. Are there any other, I don't know.
Yeah, I can answer the first question from my perspective. Is, do you ever get tired of having to deal with somebody else's chronic illness? And for me personally, I don't feel like that's real. I don't feel like I get tired of it. It doesn't seem like anything that's separated. This kind of answers the third question too. Like, is there a separation of the person from the disease? And yeah, there definitely is. Like, if my wife isn't feeling well because she's having a low blood sugar, I'm not like, oh, this is Shannon, like I am annoyed with her. There's a complete separation. Those are two different things. They're not intertwined. And I don't ever feel like tired of having to deal with it in any different sort of sense than like, I'm tired if, she leaves the cabinet drawers open over and over again, right? Like it's like there's no difference in that. It's not like oh, your chronic illness is obnoxious or anything like that. I never feel like that. It's just something that has to be dealt with. If a dog has an accident, if like things in life happen, right, and they're out of our control sometimes, and that's why I use if a dog has an accident, which is not a good comparison, but it just came to mind, obviously. But like things are out of control, and are not in our control, and it doesn't matter how perfectly she tries to control her diabetes. It just doesn't work that way. So I don't ever feel like it's like a tiresome thing. That doesn't affect me that way,
Yeah. I'm going to dive in, if you don't mind, on a kind of a different post, because Joe and I are friends. And a mutual friend introduced us together, and we love to hike and cycle and do active things together. But she didn't mention to me that she was type 1 until we were on a hike one time. She said, oh, by the way, did I tell you I'm type 1? I went, no, but it's a good thing to know. Because we'll cycle 50 miles, we'll hike 10 miles. And so it's been a privilege to be a supporter to her. She manages her type 1 extremely well. She got diagnosed when she was 38 years old. And again, she is the aunt of Stephanie's husband, and it's been an education. My former husband's brother and his niece both were also type 1, and well, brother is still type 1. A niece sadly passed away. But it's been through Joe that, she does manage it very well, but she'll say, I'm low. Or when we were hiking the Grand Canyon, she said, oh, by the way, here's my glucagon. If this happens, this is what you need to do. And I went, okay, just don't go there. But, you know, so, and I admire her. I absolutely admire her for everything that she does. And she just gives me, oh God, what will be the word be? I'm just so amazed about anybody who has type 1 on how they are able to manage it, live active lives, deal with their lows when they need to deal with their lows, and keep on going. So anyway, again, it's been a privilege to me to be to be a supporter as a friend to Joe. But again, I don't live with her day in and day out, so I don't. But she knows I'm there if she needs me.
Good to
And
have
that's
this.
huge. That alone is huge, as many of you know, who have supporters. Did everybody introduce themselves that's on the panel? Sorry, I got kicked out for a little bit there.
We did actually get through introductions, and then we were sort of going through, I think Neil still was going to talk, because we were kind of going over what it was like to just in general be the caregiver or aspect, like the husbands. I kind of went quickly over Luke. So I think Neil and Kathy just did hers.
Okay, Neil, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. Sure, yeah. Well, I was just going to concur with like what Steve was saying about having to live with someone that has type 1 diabetes, is that it doesn't come across as like an issue for me, because I think we both look at it as like it's a situation. Just like, you know, sometimes it rains or like whatever, things happen that are outside of our control. And so there's no point in getting upset about it, because that's just the way it is. And I think like in my mind, it just feels like, you know, it's just something that you live with, right? But it's never, for me, it's never been an issue. It's more like, you know, I look at Maya and I'm just like, wow, you know, she has to deal with this every single day. And it amazes me, because I honestly don't think I could have that much self-control that she does. So but yeah, it's not, I've never looked at it as like an inconvenience or something, because it's just like that's how it is, you know.
Yeah. And then Ryan, I think still.
Yeah, I agree. It's just a thing that is there in the background. I mean, there's easy days and there's hard days. But as much as I would ever wish that we didn't have to deal with it, you know, Kate's the one actually having to deal with it, not me. So I just try to be there to help her through it.
That's great.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So my situation's a little different than maybe some of the other type 1s, but I'm an adult onset, so I was 38 when I got diagnosed, and already married, and so diabetes is now in our relationship, and it was never there before. And how do you help your supporter understand that what you've all said, which is things happen, like no matter how well you plan or what you try? You know, I do the majority of my management, but sometimes the people around you are like, what did you eat? Or how much insulin did you give yourself? Or like, how do you help them kind of change the language around that and understand that, you know, things happen?
I could talk to this if you want.
Sure.
Yeah, so basically, you know, like I said, my wife and I have been married for 17 years, and we've had a lot of conversations. And honestly, I've gone wrong a lot of times where I've, you know, tried to be helpful and it's come across as not being helpful. And everyone with T1D has understood that, where somebody has interfered too much, right? So obviously, that's not what I want to do. I want to be helpful. So having those conversations were really useful for my side, right? And that's how I'm answering this question, is like, what worked for me to give me feedback. And so when she was like, hey, that wasn't useful for you to ask if I should have another cookie, right? Like that's obviously a very prominent example, but it is one that happens, right? So that is really useful to get this feedback. Like and it's hard to do ahead of time. It's almost easier to do in retrospect, but everyone has to be calm. And it's hard to also bring that up. Like, hey, do you remember yesterday when you said that? That made me angry. Here's why. Or I didn't like that and I felt like I was being restricted. I want to make my own choices. I also think that trying to go through, and this one's much harder, but trying to go through the management of what you have to do on a daily basis, because For people without type 1 diabetes, it's whenever we go through like, hey, what's happening to you? You guys make a million decisions every single day. And when we get involved, it's like we did 4 decisions, right? Like we're like, oh, what's happening? This seems pretty easy to manage. And so kind of giving more insight for me was really useful. Like when my wife got a pump and a CGM, and she was going through like, all right, here's all the settings I'm messing with, and here's all the information I'm dealing with. And it would be like, we think we have everything great, and then 2 weeks later it would all change. Not that when I say we, it was just like I would be involved in the process, not making decisions, but seeing like what she was doing, and kind of helping out, like technically, if I could, like, why didn't this login work for this website or whatever, stuff like that. And that helped me really get an understanding of, no matter what she does, no matter how hard she tries, there's no perfect way to get it down. And there's just stuff happens, like randomly you're high in the middle of the night and you didn't do anything wrong, nothing changed, you ate the same meal, you took the same insulin. Like, yeah, I mean, she, as a real quick example, she just got like Starbucks, and it was the same drink she always gets, and randomly she was 100 points higher, and she was just like, why am I in the 200s now? This is the same drink I always do. And so understanding that that's her life has helped me a lot to know when I can try to be helpful and when it's not helpful to interject, because it would not be helpful at that moment to be like, well, what did you do wrong? It's like she didn't do anything wrong. Nothing changed. So
leaving it open-ended, like how can I help versus deciding.
Yeah.
Did someone
Yeah,
else?
I do agree with that, but I think it's oftentimes very hard for, at least in my wife and I's relationship, for her to answer like, what if I say, what do you need help with? She would say like, I don't know necessarily, so just keeping that as an open dialogue is helpful.
Did anybody else want to comment?
I'm going to add to that. Yeah, I was just going to add, not necessarily, it's not necessarily like an active thing, but I've noticed that one thing that a behavior that I've tried to change is to put less pressure on Maya to do things. For example, like if we go on a hike or something, just being prepared to turn around, like if something goes bad, or like, hey, we need to take a break, or we need to chill, or just giving the sort of room or the space, like, hey, sometimes we need to take a break and she needs to check her blood sugar or do some things. But like, I noticed that just not being as intense about stuff like, hey, we need to go do something, or we need to do this, just giving her that space. I noticed that that's helped a lot in many situations. It takes if there is anything that you can do to take pressure off of the person. So yeah, I just wanted to add that a little bit.
Stephanie, I'm curious, with a child who is newly diagnosed, where we're dealing with, I think, adults more, and they can articulate maybe a little bit more. How do you approach that with someone that maybe can't articulate?
It's funny
They
because
need support or need help.
I was gonna say, I'm listening to the answers from the husband, and it's really neat because even though I'm a caregiver just like them, my role is very different, where I know everything. I don't know everything he eats, which causes problems because he sneaks food trying to be behind my back. Like I'm not going to find out, but yet I get the alert on my phone that says he's 289 right now, climbing double air. I'm like, what did you eat? So I sort of target, like, they were saying, like, you don't want to make them feel bad by any stretch, because, they want to help them. You don't need the answer of what'd you eat? What'd you do wrong? That is my biggest issue that I deal with him, because he's learning versus, a woman is able to say like, I needed something or whatever the case is. So I kind of float both ways. I have a lot of what the husbands say, but I can see where she's saying, how can I make this communication better? Because it is really hard when there's 2 people trying to help, and he's not really able to help himself. So I have to help him help himself. And I'm the one making the 180,000 decisions during the day. And I personally use an app that we share, and it's the Diabetes M app. And so I don't know if this will help you, Bree, but I log in all of the food, and sometimes she'll just do the silly, like take a picture of the food and I load it to the app. And then that way because it's a cloud thing, he can look at his app and be like, oh yeah, I already ate 60 carbs, whatever, and it keeps track of the highs and lows, but hormones play in that, and he's a growing boy. Stress plays in that. I mean, for the type 1s, they know that it doesn't matter what you eat or how much you plan, it changes, and you have to be able to accept that. And so I'm good at that. He gets more frustrated because he's still learning how to live with it. So I float both, like between both of those answers or the question. I feel like I'm the one with the diabetes, but I have no idea how it feels. I have no idea how stressful it is on a daily basis to be like, I just want to hike. I don't want to stop. I have him just complaining because he can't go on a bike ride. My husband's like, let's go. And he can't go because he just got 4 units of insulin and he'll drop so fast. So we wait an hour and then he's totally fine to go. It's learning patience. And I think that's the biggest thing that everyone can have. Like you said before, this is not an inconvenience for us who take care of them. It is what it is. And you just have to kind of live this way. It's just, for anybody with any illness or handicap, it's how you live your life. And so we try to make it a positive, but open communication is best. You really have to talk about your feelings. I know that come kind of weird. I know for the women, it's easier to say, I don't know what I want. I just want you to listen, but I don't know what I want. And then my son closes up. So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, interesting perspective you have. I have a question for the supporters, if I may. Do you get supporter burnout, and what does that look like?
You guys want to go? I feel like I talk too much.
Yeah, I can go again. I don't feel like I get supporter burnout because I don't feel like I have to deal with it as on a daily, like there's days where Shannon, she's a person who really pays attention to her diabetes, and so she's really invested in it. She'll spend lots of time with it, and so there's days, sometimes multiple days in a row, where I don't have to give it a second thought because she is just really on top of it and within range. And so she's proudly showed me her CGM before, where it's been like she's 97% in range for the day, so it's like I don't get the burnout because I do get breaks from it. So I don't feel like that's ever a conscious thought. My thing that I feel like I have to consciously think about is if one of the things I try to help with is if we have snacks in the not snacks, but like sugar in the house to deal with. Like sometimes in our family, we'll run our groceries really, really low before either one of us will go grocery shopping. And so it'll be like, well, we're out of juice. We have like 2 packages of fruit snacks left, like that sort of thing that I want to pay attention to. So that's a conscious effort, but I don't feel like I get fatigue or burnout like I've heard many people with type 1 talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in the beginning I did a little bit when we were first together. She tended to go low a lot at night, and I was the one who was waking up to test her blood sugar and get her snacks and things like that. But I think now that she's on a CGM and a closed loop pump, we've both really been able to relax. Where she can go 5 or 6 hours without even thinking about it, and the pump just does what it needs to do, and that's been great for both of us.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was going to say, again, I'm the friend supporter, and I just feel it's a privilege that I can be part of Joe's life and do what I can to be there for her when, whether she's just had a bad day at work and needs to vent, or if she has to cancel because she's having a low on something and she can't get through it and she's apologizing. You just, as I said, you just kind of go with the flow, and it is what it is. And, she, so long as they know how to deal with it and when to deal with it, and know when to call for help if they need help, that's what counts. it's a journey. I mean, it's a journey for the husbands, spouses, it's a journey for the parents. It's just, it's life. And again, for the type 1s who are dealing with it every day and their supporters that are in there as partners with it, I just, my hat goes out to everybody.
Stephanie, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I would be lying if I said no, that I get burned out, that I don't. I do, but it's a different type. It's kind of goes back to what Steve had said earlier when we were touching on those questions. And it's not like a burnout, like I resent him and I'm mad and I didn't sleep and I'm grumpy and I walk around the house doing like, woe is me, well, I woke up last night for him. You kind of just, I don't know, like Ryan, waking up in the middle of the night, it gets long when you're always having to wake up every couple of hours and never getting REM sleep. And it's really hard on your body, but there's never, I think I see it as it's just what it is for right now. My daughter had seizures when she was little, so I sort of had, that already, that like all around the clock watching caregiving things. So when he got it, I'm already watching it. It's not a burnout, but you definitely get, you get physically tired, but you don't burn out, or you're not overwhelmed to the point that you don't want to do it. You're always there for it. So it's a little different.
Or fatigue, maybe just.
Yeah, I would say it's more fatigue, but I just started figuring out different ways. I go to bed at 7 o'clock some nights. I try to sleep until 10 o'clock, and then I'll check it at 10, and then I have another one at 4, and I have my cycles, but it's not, I don't know, it's not a bad thing. I don't mind. And he does have the Omnipod now, which has helped a little bit. It does not prevent the lows like the Tandem, and hopefully the new one will, but it was a better fit for him just in general because of the connection and stuff. So there's new technology that hopefully will help all of us, the type 1s and the caregivers, because I know for a fact, having the Tandem, my mother-in-law sleeps better. Everyone to have that ability, but that's not accessible for everybody. It is a game changer though, because you do have a lot less worry. Like Ryan said, that you can go 5 hours without thinking about her blood because you just kind of stay in range. But I also really did well because I was very adamant and very detailed about his shots. So I like both functions. I get more sleep if he has the pod. And I guess that's really the benefit for me. Not for him, but for me.
Yeah, you got to think about that. Any other questions for the T1 panel? If not, I'll go to the questions that came through.
I have one. Or did someone else have one?
No, go ahead. I didn't see anybody else.
And again, I think this is just because we're still learning in our house. How do you help your supporters like understand the changes for like scheduling and routine? So like what Stephanie was saying, like you have 4 units on board, you can't go for a bike ride, right? Like sometimes, and this goes for like social life too, like sometimes people will invite us to do stuff and then we can't do it because like I do have 4 units on board and I can't go. But even for the immediate supporters, I think sometimes that's challenging. Like I worry about compassion fatigue because there are things I have to say no to or, change because of what we have to do for management.
It's funny you say that because we've kind of done a couple of things where we've had to say no. Just knowing that it would be too much on him type of thing. And we typically aren't the type of people. So it is an adjustment. Some of it is we're learning. I don't know about the guys, but like for you learning what works for you. Obviously you can do stuff on insulin. It's just that you have to have a lot of snacks available because you don't know how fast it's going to hit you. Was your food a long digest or was it a quick digest? And all of a sudden you're rock bottom. The other day he went out to play tennis. He had like 4 units on board, but he had eaten 80 carbs, like something crazy amount. and he went from 280 to 70 in like 30 minutes. Like it was insane how fast he dropped. There was no reason for him to go that fast, but he just did. I don't know why. And so I have to call out and say, you're done. And it's kind of sad, but at the same time, they took a break, he got some sugar, and then they went back out there. I think it's definitely a shock in the beginning to have to give up the things, but I think that as you learn how things work, you'll go back into them, because Joe does everything. I mean, when I say everything, she's I call it a marathon biker. She rides like 10s and 20s and 30 miles of bikes, and she manages herself well. And I'm sure she's had to give up a thing or two here or there, but I think the more you learn and the more you share, like my husband doesn't give the insulin, he doesn't give the carbs, he doesn't give any of that stuff. He just kind of says, can he go? I'm the one learning where it works and where it doesn't work. And so everyone just has to be accepting of it for a little bit. I try not to put it on everybody though. And my son understands that maybe we stay behind, or maybe everyone goes, but we have a breakout plan where he and I will kind of hold back, but everyone else can continue on. Because we're really active. They wakeboard, they kayak, they do all these other things. We bring snacks, and I let him swim, but he can't swim hard, type of thing. Like if he has a lot of insulin on board, until he just regulates, and then we continue on our way. So I think you just start to learn more how you handle it, and then you can guide the people easier. But it does help when you explain what's happening. Like, look, I'm going to drop really fast if I do this. I'm going to have to wait an hour.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I feel like explaining how you feel to somebody as an adult, that's like a kid to a parent might have a hard time doing that, so this is why I'm adding something. But an adult to an adult, like if I'm like, how are you feeling right now when you go low, or how are you feeling when you go high? Not maybe in the moment, because that's a bad time to try to explain how you feel, but after the fact, really will garnish a lot of sympathy from people to be like, this is how it feels. The description of it sounds miserable, to be like really high or to be really low, and putting that back to back with, hey, we have to stop doing our activity right now because I feel this way again. And that really puts it in perspective. I mean, if somebody sprained an ankle, you wouldn't be like, well, I guess the hike's off today. You would be like, oh, wow, okay, we've got to stop, right? So I think that puts it in perspective for people who don't have type 1 diabetes. And then I think another part of that is if you're in a social setting, because that could be just, you and your husband, Bree, so I'm talking to. But if in a social setting, I think for my wife and I, it was very apparent that we needed to have a conversation, like who would talk about it. If she wanted to be in charge of telling other people, like, I can't do this thing, let's say we're with another couple, or we're with a big group of people, be like, I need to stop. Or if she wanted me to be her advocate and say, hey, Shannon's not feeling right now, she's going to go do this thing. We just need to wait 20 minutes, or you guys can go on without us, like that sort of a thing. And having that conversation ahead of time is usually useful. But yeah, those two things I think really help figure out what's going on and how you want to approach it, instead of, I just feel like if you try to do it retroactively or in the moment, it usually doesn't go well. Somebody ends up being upset, or there's miscommunication. So
Well, and I think too, if it's a low, I don't know about for all of you, but when you start going low, you don't necessarily think as clearly either, or at least that's what I'm finding with my son. Because like you said, with the articulation, the adults typically can convey how they feel to you a little better. And as long as you have an advocate, that's good. But I think even my father-in-law, like he starts not making sense when he's really low. So it's like, well, what do you need? And I think they don't always know. So I think it's good for either your husband or even your kids. My littlest one watches my son's Dexcom like a hawk. She's like, Mom, is 106 okay for bed? And I'm like, yes, that's fine. I'm watching him. Fine. But
That's
I
cute.
think there's some sympathy that comes with somebody being not sympathy, and it's not that you're looking for sympathy, but when you hit really low and they can see that you're not great, I think it will resonate. So maybe giving some responsibility to them, even though it's not really a responsibility. like, look what happens to me when I ride a bike. I drop really fast. And to show it, maybe you don't have to show them, but I mean, sometimes it's cause and effect that will make sense to somebody, like Steve said, to create a little bit of empathy. Like, it's not the end of the world. We don't have to stop completely. We just need to kind of take a break, or we need to back off. And having those feelings before you're in a low, I feel like lows are the bigger issue than highs. Because communication just doesn't work when they're that low. I feel like, you can't communicate comfortably when you're really low.
Do any of the people on the panel find the books out there, if you've read any, and if so, which ones, to help describe some of the experience and like sugar surfing? I don't know if anyone's, as a supporter, has read that to get an understanding of, or appreciation or compassion of what a type 1 person would feel or experience or have to keep track of. Has anyone read any, or do you get most of your information from the person or the person you support?
Well, I read the sugar surfing.
Was it helpful in any way?
It was very helpful to have a better understanding of when you're going low or you're going high and what that means, and what even maybe little changes in personality that I can be aware of, just to see how you're doing. It's a very good book to even for me, because my blood sugar will go down, and everybody knows when my blood sugar goes down that I get fuzzy brained and I need food immediately. So it's totally different than from having type 1, but at least I have a little bit of a concept of, we start crashing, whether you're type 1 or whatever, when your blood sugar goes down, you turn into a different person. Mm-hmm. So, but the surfing book, I did find it very educational, and it helped with the awareness.
I watched a TED Talk from Dr. Jody Stansla about sugar. It's called
Sugar's Not Sweet or something like that, or
and actually that was the very first thing that I kind of started researching when I found out my son was diabetic, and it was a short enough clip, but it was such good information, and it really applies to everybody, not just diabetics. It's the way that your body processes it and stuff. I actually ended up following Jody Stansla for a little bit. She has I actually consulted with her with my son for a little bit, and some of it was super helpful. Actually, she was the one that was able to get me to understand the insulin and exercise. I sort of understood it, and it was making sense to me. But I guess the old mentality for diabetics years ago was carb up if you're going to play soccer, carb up. And then all of a sudden, because you had the carbs, you had to get the amount of insulin. Next thing you know, you're dropping and you're stopping every 15 minutes for your snacks. She was the one that was able to point out how your insulin and your exercise both kind of act the same way, and you can almost give yourself less insulin. She's also has, other techniques and stuff. So just her information, I didn't read her book. I think she has a book, but she has a couple of TED Talks, and she has a lot of information that me as a caregiver trying to figure out diabetes, because my son was not understanding it completely. She was super helpful.
It's Sugar is Not a Treat is the TED Talk.
Okay, yes, I knew sugar something.
One of her several, anyway.
Yeah, she has a lot of them, and like I said, it's good for even people that don't have diabetes, because sugar affects everybody. It's just that it affects diabetics in a more lethal way.
Any other questions? I'll go to the list.
I have a question. I'm curious because when I grew up with diabetes, there wasn't as much phone technology around it, phone apps weren't a thing, and CGM wasn't really a thing yet. And so all my interactions with my parents were very one-on-one with regards to diabetes. But now there's you can keep track of your kids' blood sugars on the other side of the country. Do you ever struggle with like figuring out how to like be aware, but also like not like helicopter.
That's a hard one. And helicoptering happens, but I'm responsible for him, I feel like. I don't know if it would happen with the husbands the same way. It doesn't sound like they helicopter, but here's my Dexcom. He's, you know, his blood is always in front of me. So I think it makes it more helicoptery to have it available. But it also brings a huge sense of relief that I don't have to call or tell him to check his blood. Well, you look funny. You know, he might have been outside playing tennis and he's all red and like, I'm like, oh my God, check your blood. You know, you freak out versus with the Dexcom, it's like, oh, you're 158, you're fine. I don't have to worry about that. So yes, you helicopter, but it's from really far away. You're not on it.
From a husband's perspective, I definitely think the ability is there to do it. And because my wife's obviously an adult, she manages her own diabetes, but every once in a while you'll see, you know, the number go really low. And then I won't be with her, so I'll call her and be like, "What's going on? Are you okay?" Not to say like what you do wrong, but to be like, "Are you okay? Like, were you able to get some sugar? Do you know it's low?" And on very rare occasions, she's been like, "Oh, I didn't even know that was the number." On other times, I haven't been able to get a hold of her, which is just panic-inducing because you're like, "What is going on?" So I think technology is great because there's been times when she first got it and I was like, cool, I can just check the number. You know, like as a loved one of somebody who has diabetes, it's a fear of mine that I would just wake up in the middle of the night and she would no longer be with me. Like she would just be next to me, but not there, you know? And so I can wake up in the middle of the night and like relieve that panic. And so it's nice to have the technology for some reasons. But honestly, it's more of a comfort for me than it ever is an assistance to her. There's been like maybe 3 times in our decade of her having that type of technology, or maybe 7 years, something like that, that I've actually called her up and or said like, hey, do you know your blood sugar's low? And she's been like, no, I didn't. Like 99.9% of the time, it's just a relief for me. But yeah, that from a parenting situation, I think it's a vital, you know, for someone who is a young child, I think that'd be vital to be able to have that information because they're not aware of everything going on.
You don't, supposedly from the descriptions that I'm getting between, you know, father-in-law of almost 30 years and then type 1, just 1 year, they don't feel the same thing. Not at all. My father-in-law says if he gets to 300, he feels like he's hit by a truck for 2 days. Now, he's also 70. He's had it for years and, you know, whatever. But my son could be at 380 for an hour and a half. And I come in there and like, you need insulin. He's like, what? Like, he's playing video games and he's totally fine. Now he might feel a little crummy later on, but it's not as instantaneous. He feels his lows fast. But sometimes, like, you know, what I said before, they drop so fast that it does create a panic and you're not aware of it. So I think it's a blessing because when we got his Dexcom versus not having it, I was able to relax and so was he, because he was able to check it more often too. And he was able to help himself understand what each number meant. Like when he was feeling kind of crummy, how high was he? Or if he was shaky, was he low? And I don't think he knew what he felt prior to having the Dexcom. So it helped both of us, I think, tremendously.
As a T1D and having the Dexcom and knowing that Ryan has access to the numbers and what's going on has been a relief for me, because that takes some of the weight and the pressure and the worry off of my shoulders. I've been doing it for 30 years and it's a relief for me to know that he's there and he can see what's going on and catch me if I need it, like as a reminder.
Well, and I can
Sorry,
I think
go
I have a
ahead.
Zoom delay. So I can give a little bit more specific example of that. I used to travel more for work. And before Kate had the CGM, and especially a CGM that I could monitor remotely, we'd be on a system where I would call her first thing in the morning to make sure that she wasn't low. And there were actually a couple trips where she didn't answer the phone. I ended up having to call her mom or her sister. They had to go over to the house. And then there was actually one trip in particular, neither her mom nor her sister could make it to the house. So the paramedics had to get called, and they actually went out to the house, and her blood sugar was 40 and she was asleep and didn't know it. And so, yeah, having the CGM and being able to monitor it remotely is very important to us. And I don't think it's helicoptering at all. It's just literally a life safety thing.
Yeah.
So it gives me relief to know that he's always there, always able to check on me. And Stephanie, your son might not realize it now. How you said he was 12?
Yeah.
When I was 12, the last thing I wanted was somebody always looking over my shoulder.
No.
So
Well, and that's why it's good, because I'm not physically bothering him. He's on his own up in his room. He has sleepovers. It's not something we have a bunch of friends actually that live close to us that are, I say a bunch, there's 3. That's a bunch in my mind. They have children with type 1, and when I first found out that Luke was diabetic, we went through the whole process. I had to wrap my head around it for a couple of days, learning how to give shots and stuff. And then I called the one mom and I said, "Oh, just letting you know that Luke has type 1 too." And all she did is start crying. And I'm like, "Oh, like I thought I was handling it pretty well. I'm seeing it as like he's eating better, he's sleeping better, we're making sure he's getting X amount of exercise. To me, this is like forcing him to be what we always told him. It's like, you're like Superman. You just, you have to just be perfect. You get these little like he was eating crazy good food for a little 12-year-old, and he was pleasant, and he was accepting of the information, and he was positive. And so I didn't see it as a bad thing. And all she did was cry. She's like, "You have no idea," because her son is very little. And she watches him and hovers. And the more that they hover, the more the kid pulls back. And the older that he gets, the more he's sneaking food and he's doing this. So I try really hard not to hover, but I can't not have this thing, and I can't not watch him, because just like you said, the 40s, that's terrifying. When you see that number pop up, your heart sinks. And if they don't answer, it just happened the other day. He was 50 and he was swimming at my mother-in-law's, and I called and he didn't answer, and my husband didn't answer. And I'm like, "Oh, he's in the pool. What if he's in the lake?" And sure enough, he was in the pool swimming with the dog. And my husband didn't know why he wasn't popping out of the water like he normally does. And I got his attention. He answered, and he's like, "Get out." He had to pull him out because he was just so low that it didn't even occur to him to swim away. He just kept trying to come up, and you don't think clearly. So had I not been watching the Dexcom, neither of them were watching it, and they're playing, and he was dropping so fast that it wasn't a gradual thing for him. So the Dexcom for us has helped. In the year that we've had it, it's helped tremendously. And again, I don't think he sees it as helicoptering. And I try to tell him, I'm like, "This is only because I love you. Not because I'm trying to bug you."
Any other questions out there? Okay, I've got one from the question list. And if you've covered this and want to move on to a different question, if you feel like you've covered it, let me know. What's the most challenging part of being a supporter of someone diagnosed with type 1?
I guess I can answer. So I think one of the most challenging parts that I've seen is kind of like right now, the way that we're dealing with the coronavirus is we have to be extra careful because of that. And I see a lot of people around me not taking this disease seriously. And it's hard because it's like you have to be extra, it's almost like you have to be extra paranoid. We just had a scare recently last week. Our neighbors caught it. And there is a fear that, you know, if Maya ends up going to a hospital, it could be a really bad situation. And so I've noticed that at least that having to have this on top of everything else is just, yeah, it's made it, for us, it's made it pretty difficult, I would say.
Yeah.
Anyone else on the panel? What's the most challenging?
I think just the fact that you know that you can't help them with everything. You can't keep it perfect. I think that for me is the biggest struggle. I'm sure husbands, you know, parents all alike would like to be able to be like, just eat this and you'll be fine. It's the hundreds of thousands of thoughts and decisions that you have to make, and there's no plan. You can't have a solid plan, because even if there's a general direction, you may go left, right 700 times. And it's not that you don't want to do it or anything. It's just say that's the hardest thing, because you're having a thought process for every single thing that you do. Instead of just being able to let go, like with the sleepovers with him, I can't just say goodbye and have a night off. No matter what, I have to make sure that, you know, I still check his Dexcom so that he can have his sleepovers. You know, you call to make sure that he had this food or whatever. There's just an effort, I guess, is more the thing. It's not that it's hard. It's just that there's a lot more than your daily life.
Any other challenges out there that you want to comment on?
Go ahead, Ryan.
What?
What's the most challenging for you, Ryan?
No, I think, like Stephanie said, the most challenging thing is that, you know, Kate has her burnout days that she's, you know, entitled to have. And when there's nothing I can do to help her when that happens, except reassure her that, you know, I'm there for her. That's the hardest part.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that helps a lot, just knowing you're there. Any other questions? I got another one. Panelists, what do you wish you had been told when your loved one or friend or whatever was diagnosed as type 1? In Kathy's case, you probably wished you were told, period. But what do you what do you wish you were told when that came about?
I'm going to go ahead and answer it. Is for me is just to say to some suggestions which came along later, including Jody, and being able to go on retreats with you to learn more about type 1 is having resources. Just say, well, this might, and you've done a good job, you know, along the way. But at that time, it's like, what does this really mean, and what kind of ways that I could feel like could be more helpful to you? And understanding, I mean, everything from Dexcoms and CGMs and the you know, the language of T1Ds. What does this number mean when you say I'm 50, or I'm, you know, and I've have learned a lot from the retreats when they go through all this stuff as far as what people are going through and how they've done it. So I think that for me it is going to be there and understanding.
I'll add a comment to that. As a T1, I'm both a T1 and a supporter of other T1s, but I think, and others on the panel, please comment on this. I'd like to get your opinions. I know I'll get sick of or tired or just in a burnout, get tired of explaining, tired of showing, so what I found worked for me is, in Kathy's case, I'm like, just come with me to the retreat. Or here, read this book. And then you can take from it what you want to get from it. So that's worked for me with some people in my life. But you embrace that, Kathy, and thank you for that. I'm sure not everybody will, but does anybody have that same feeling? Like you just, I don't know what, I don't want to explain it anymore. And have you noticed that, husbands or mothers?
I'm sure Maya has.
Yeah, it's like, I can't explain it anymore. I just can't. So read this book.
I've never had a problem explaining. I've always enjoyed, as a type 1, I've always enjoyed educating people, because there's such a miscommunication or misinformation that's put out there
Sure.
that
Mhm.
people don't understand, and they treat me differently, and I actually enjoy putting them in their place and being like, yes, I can eat that cookie. I can totally eat
You
that
go,
cookie.
Caitlin.
I just have to bolus for it. No, eating that piece of cake is not going to cause diabetes. It doesn't work like that, you guys. And I enjoy, like I said, putting them in their place and straightening them out. It's like, yeah, it's something I'm passionate about.
It's, for me, it's hard to talk to anyone that's like really into naturopath or like alternative medicine, because there's a lot of folks that we've encountered where we've had really awkward conversations where they think that there's some magic cure if you just, you know, take some essential oils or like whatever.
Cinnamon.
Cinnamon.
Yeah.
So that's always unpleasant, especially like if you're at like some friend's house or something, you're having they're having a barbecue or something, and then the crazy hippie person comes up and starts like, you know, listing off like, hey, I know a friend that cured themselves of diabetes because they ate nuts and like fruit
And
for
you
3
say,
months.
no, that's type 2, not
Yeah.
type 1, wrong
Yeah,
disease.
Yeah.
We've encountered a little bit of that. It's like, well, you really should be taking this vitamin and you need to eat keto and you need to do this, which
Yeah.
those people are not curing it. They know that they're just giving advice for, you know,
Yeah.
how to manage it easier and to start living that way, and that's fine. But yeah, the overabundance of information that I think, instead of, I know you asked the question of what do you wish was told to you? I don't know. I think the only thing I felt when I left the hospital was, I don't know if I'm ready for this to start like, I'm responsible for this life. I have to give him insulin, because at that point he couldn't give it to himself and all this other stuff. And that was scary, but they gave us enough information. They gave us lots of resources with JDRF. They have a very wide range of resources and places, camps, websites, families that they'll reach out. I mean, if anything, I was a little more like Caitlin, where I enjoyed correcting people, and even the people that were diabetic. My father-in-law is one. I'll tell you what, I got his numbers down because I gave him better information than what he'd had for the past 25 years. And there was a little bit of like, ha, I was right. I'm not going to say I got like great joy out of correcting people, because I don't like that, but there is stuff that I'm like, wait, you're learning, or you're telling me stuff from what they used to think. This is sort of a new, because we're starting newer, we're starting younger, we're starting very differently. Everything's so accessible on their internet and like TED Talks and stuff that I really don't feel like I was lacking anything. But I have a father-in-law that is type 1 that I think I never had the fear, because if I was missing something, I knew I had resources right there. I didn't have to impose on somebody. So mine is a little bit different, but I liked Caitlin's comment where you kind of get a little bit of joy of like, it's not right. But yeah, the holistic stuff is, you start listening, you're like, no, that's not gonna work. Thank you.
Thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of education needed out there. And just between the type 2 and type 1 alone. Oof.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, someone had mentioned the coronavirus earlier about that, and we've been very cautious, and same thing with my father-in-law. But when we talked to the endocrinologist about sending Luke back to school, they're not as afraid for the kids as they are the adults. And they said, if you can send them, go ahead. But if you're able to stay home, keep them home, because you want them, nobody wants to get it on purpose. And they weren't as afraid of it. And when I talked to my cousin, who's an epidemiologist, she said it's actually the type 2 diabetics that are vulnerable to COVID. And it's because of the metformin medicine. For whatever reason, I don't know if it weakens the immune system. I don't know how it triggers or what it is, but it's the type 2, but type 2s are typically heavier and they carry the extra weight. They tend to have the extra cardiac problems and so on and so forth. So there's sort of an issue other than the fact that it's type 2. So it's not to worry because they're type 1, because everybody needs to be cautious, but it gave me a little bit of peace knowing that it was the type 2s that are vulnerable, but type 1s don't want it. There's a difference between, like, okay, you are gonna get it because your body is like wanting it type of thing. So my dad, who is type 2, we were way more cautious with him than we were with my father-in-law. I don't, just because of the way that their bodies and everything, the acceptability and how they would have been able to handle it. But we quarantined pretty well. We still, all 3 of my kids are at home school. So we kind of stay in our small circles because we don't want it.
Has anyone on the panel had to help with or administer glucagon or the other options that are out there now?
Yep, I've had to do it multiple times for Kate. Mostly the injection. One time I gave her the nasal thing, but she had the really bad headache afterwards. That's one of the main side effects. So we switched back to injection.
With the nasal?
Yeah, the nasal.
I have it. I've not had to use it.
I was just going to say, so the side effect is potentially a really bad headache?
Yeah, it lasted for 2 days.
Woo, good to know.
Yeah, we actually gave Catherine her other injections of that, or other nasal things with that, and it gave Catherine a headache too. So we're just going to steer well clear of it.
Yeah, it gave Catherine a headache, and on her left side, which is the side she injected it in, she said that she had she couldn't stop moving, like her arm and her leg, and
like tremors or something.
Kind of, yeah. And apparently that is like low on the side effects list. But the headache, oh God, it was not good.
Good to know.
That's all we have. That's what we have, because that's what they were trying to give out when he first became diabetic. In fact, the insurance was giving you 2 for 1. So we haven't had to use it, but now I'm a little hesitant to refill that version.
I highly do not recommend it.
Okay.
That's one of those where you want to listen to your type 1 family because they know what it feels like, versus the endocrinologist that is like, here, try this.
Yeah.
So that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I am so glad that I can help.
Oof.
Yeah.
Good.
Anyway, back to the question. So I think the question is probably really trying to find out what it's like to have to give glucagon. The first time I did it, I think we'd probably been together for 6 months or so, and it was really scary. And I didn't like giving the injection, and I think it was the first time she'd been that low. And then the second time it was still kind of scary, but I at least knew what to expect. And then I still don't like doing it. I hate giving shots. I don't like giving her insulin too. So sometimes she'll hand me a syringe and just be like, here, give me a shot. And I don't like doing that, but it's not nearly as terrifying as it used to be.
I need a break every once in a while. Like, here, you do it.
Don't blame you.
That's totally
I
fair.
don't
You
blame
need a
you.
break. Every once in a while, my wife will be like, let's test our blood sugar together. And I turn into like a 2-year-old. I'm like, no, it's going to hurt my fingers. so the fact that you guys go through this every day, yeah, it's a lot.
Ryan actually, I got a, correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I think this was when I switched from Medtronic to Tandem, and I still had my Medtronic pump and my Medtronic CGM, and I actually had him wear them both for a day, and I thought it was great. Ryan hated it.
It wasn't that bad, and
Yeah.
it was actually a full 3-day set change. We put sterile saline in it, so I actually could bolus with it. So
Yeah.
Yes, your endocrinologist can hook you up for that. So if as a type 1 you're struggling to get your loved one to understand what it's like, like ask your endocrinologist, please let me get a borrowed pump and saline and hook up my loved one, because I guarantee you it'll change their perspective. I did that for my wife as well when she first had a pump, and it was like, ooh, this is a lot. I mean, back then it was not the Omnipod, it was the Medtronic, and it was the wired one, and just like catching that on a doorknob was a lot. Just
That's a
happened to
great
me.
idea.
Yeah.
I know that's possible, but I keep forgetting that. But
yeah, back to the question too. Yeah, I've administered a glucagon myself, and the first time you do it, it's terrifying because the person is unresponsive, and it kind of goes back to one of the questions was, what's the most challenging part, or what do you wish you had been told as a loved one? Is that like when you first were like as a person who doesn't have diabetes, being told about it, like, hey, what does this mean for our relationship? I wish somebody would have told me that, yeah, she's going to go low, and that means she's going to be not cooperative, unresponsive, maybe giggling and think it's ridiculous, right? Like it's the responses are different, and I have to like help her through that when it's a terrifying moment for me. So administering the glucagon is also pretty terrifying. I wish I would have been told, like, I wish I would have gone through the process ahead of time. Like there was a saline one, that somebody would have like walked me through that, because you're panicking and you pull out the instructions, and like every other medical device in the history of the world, the instructions for use are like this long. It's like a scroll. Like you're like, what is all this? We'll throw that away. And then you're just looking at labels, like trying to interpret like what the labels on the back of the cartridge say. And so going through it one time, like, all right, this is what you have to do. Like so they're different. Some of the sets are like, there's 3 different versions out there or something, right? So it's like you need to know what do I have, and what how does it work? And then I also wish somebody would have told me like actually how glucagon works, and that it's just releasing sugar in your liver. And so it's not like this infinite pump. You're not actually pumping sugar into somebody. You're just like introducing a new chemical reaction in somebody's body. And so there's a limit to that, and what that is, and when you should, because you, as the person without diabetes, you're trying to make this judgment call, like, okay, I'm trying to get them to eat. Okay, they say they're going to throw up, or they're not going to eat anymore, they can't eat anymore. All right, I guess their numbers are still low and it's not coming up. We've waited the appropriate amount of time. I'm going to inject them with glucagon, and then sometimes it doesn't come up, and you're like, what do I do now? So like knowing kind of what those reactions are and going through that step would have been super helpful, just to make me feel less panicked. But I think it's like CPR training. When you actually have to do CPR, it still feels panicky, right? So but that's what would have been helpful to me.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've never thought of it that way. As a comparison to like CPR, like you know how to do it, but in the moment it's completely different.
It is, and it's also because it's your loved one. I've had that experience where I've had to give CPR to my kid, and I had just finished a third training because I had taken years of it, and you just get recertified. And I did every single thing wrong. It saved her, but I knew as I'm blowing into her mouth, her chest is hitting my chin, and I know it's not supposed to hit my chin. But when it's your loved one, all you can do is like the best, and you're kind of like, just get them to, it's the responsiveness that is really hard, I think, to deal with this as a loved one. And that's why a lot of doctors won't operate on their children. Like, they could be the best ear, nose, and throat doctor, but they won't put tubes in their kids' ears because it's really hard to disconnect the emotion with the common sense when you have an emergency. And I can imagine, I haven't done the glucagon, and actually Steve just told me a couple of things that now I will be a little bit more prepared if it comes time for it.
Yeah, open that set up and read the instructions right now. At least understand, like some of them you have like, it's like there's a solution in the bottom and it's dried and you have to fill up this vial of liquid first and then like mix them together. Yeah, you need to pay attention to like the sequence and what you're supposed to do. There's been many cases where people have just injected the basically saline solution without mixing the medicine into it, and then nothing happens. But yeah, I think that it's also important to know, like, every supporter has their own level of comfort. And my wife went on a longer trip with a friend of ours and talked to her about the glucagon and said, hey, if this happens, like, this is what you should do. And she was just like, no, if you aren't responsive, I'm just going to call the paramedics. And my wife was like, great, that's fine too. You know, like, there's no shame in that. There's no like, oh, I couldn't do it. It's like, well, that's why we have paramedics, you know, and that's why we have healthcare systems. So whatever you feel comfortable with is what you should really be doing. Don't think you have to like bring somebody back. If somebody had a cardiac arrest, you wouldn't think you'd have to like go defibrillate them. So, you know, whatever you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
Like, you guys brought up a really good point. I'm actually a nurse practitioner and I've been through some horrific codes. And I think for those of us who work in healthcare, we get through it because we have so many people we can talk to about it and we're not alone. And I never even thought what it's like for you guys to do that stuff and resuscitate us and not have anyone to share that experience with other than the person you were trying to resuscitate. So how do you guys like decompress after that kind of stuff? Like, who do you talk to?
There's a couple people I feel like I can talk to about it, but it has to be somebody who also has it, you know, who also is a supporter, you know, or a supporter and a person with type 1 diabetes. But I feel like the decompression, like my wife's response even to the injection shot for glucagon is that she feels nauseous for days. Like, she just does not feel good. She'll feel real bad for at least 12 to 24 hours and sometimes longer. And so both of us, it's kind of like we drank too heavily and we just have a hangover for the next day and a half. Like, we're like, all right, we're going to take it easy, you know? So we kind of decompress together. But
I think I just truck along. I don't know. I mean, I have my mom, you know, you tell somebody what happened or whatever the case is, but I don't know. There's not really a straight decompression, I guess. The letdown. I have a really funny story after what happened after my daughter was resuscitated and fine and in the hospital and tests had come back. So I think right now when I retell the story, instead of getting all choked up that my daughter had suffocated in her bumper pads, I don't see it as sad because I know that she's alive and she has no brain damage and everything was fine. But I have like kind of a funny afterwards. So I try to keep it light so nobody ever feels the same pain. I don't want people to feel bad for me type of thing. I don't know if that's how you men feel, but it's not like when you help your loved one, you don't want them to be like, oh, you poor thing, you had to do that. I like the praise, I guess, like oh, you're so lucky you were there. I'm so glad you could help. But I don't know if there's like a straight decompression that I've ever experienced with Luke, with my daughter, with any of it. I think you just are glad they're alive and you feel better after that. You need to sleep really long.
I don't feel like I can I don't, what do I want to say? I don't feel like I need a decompress, because I understand that whatever she went through is way worse than what I went through, right? I mean, obviously there is some, like, okay, I had to go through this thing and I was really scared about it, and I'm glad that she recovers from it. But I'm not like, oh wow, okay, I know, good, you're on your own now for the next 12 hours. I got to go disappear. I don't feel like that. It's more of just relief of like, okay, everything turned out okay, and we didn't have to call, the paramedics or go to the hospital or something like that. Those are not uncommon cases. So, yeah.
It's more of a
I
letdown.
yeah. I
Like
do want to
like
point out
body
that we
let.
have like 5 minutes left, and I think the last question is one of the most important questions. So that somebody wrote down. So I think we should address that question. But I don't want to interrupt if people have more things to say. I just would like to say that as a person living with T1D, the question is, I struggle with the guilt of being a burden to my supporters. And I'm not sure if this is a question, but people, this person wants a response to that. I think that's a really important question. But if people want to talk about glucagon, I just say we go over a little bit more if people want to continue to talk about that.
No, go ahead and answer the burden question.
I think I can understand that feeling and why it may seem like that, but I think that from a supporter's perspective, that's a ridiculous stance. Like, I've never once thought my wife was a burden. There's inconveniences that happen in life, similar to the examples people have said, where it's like, let's go hiking, and then we're like, actually, no, we have to wait an hour, or even more so where it's like, I'm scared that, your blood sugar is too low and we need to try to get it up, and you're not being responsive because of the blood sugar level you have. But I've never once thought, oh my gosh, my wife is a burden to me. Like, I think that's a understandable feeling, but it's not something I've ever felt. I think it's understandable for the type 1s that have that concern, but it's not something that I've ever felt in my entire 17 or 19 years knowing her and 17 years being married to her. So
Yeah, it's not something I felt either. It goes back to our conversation at the beginning that the diabetes is just something that has to get dealt with, and it just is what it is, and we all just kind of move on with it. So no, don't be feeling that, even though it's understandable.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's I don't look at it as a burden. It's just like, it's a situation. It's like how it is. It's something that there's like, you have all these aspects in your life, right? Like, if you live in Seattle, for example, it rains, but you still love the city. I mean, it's just it's a feature of it that you kind of accept. There are some inconveniences that come with it, but it's still like, at the end of the day, it's I look at, like, I love being with Maya. She's an amazing person in my life, and it's like, well, she has this attribute about her that can create like minor inconveniences, but that's just how it is. You accept that. So I've never viewed it as like a burden, but yeah, I can definitely understand like how some people can worry about something like that, for sure.
I actually got teary-eyed when I heard the question. I don't think I saw that one on the list, and it it breaks my heart that people, like you guys have all said, it's totally understandable that somebody would worry that they're a burden on somebody. But as a caregiver, like, I don't know, I would do it every day, all day. It's not a burden. Don't ever feel that way. That is so sad. I don't like anybody to feel that way.
yeah, Caitlin, you've said before that you were like, I'm just tired of doing this. Like, you have burnout, and I said that's the one thing I wish I could give my wife in all this, is that I could just be like, cool, for this weekend I'm going to take it, and I have the type 1 diabetes, and you could just get a vacation, and that would be like, I would just love to do that. And she's like, I would never give that to you. And I'm like, well, I understand this is not how it works. But she's like, even if it did work that way, you couldn't have it. And I was like, no, like, it's something I wish I could help with, so any support I can provide is like, I don't view that as somebody being a burden to me. I'm just trying to make their life easier. You do things for your loved ones. But
Well, I don't know if Catherine's going to flip us over at some point, but thank you to all the people that called in and the panelists. I think it was a fun and interesting conversation to hear different perspectives. So thank you for taking the time to enlighten us about what it's like to be a supporter and answer the questions. This was really helpful. My takeaways are definitely go practice the glucagon. We're not burdens, or type 1 is not a burden to their supporter. And you can support in so many ways. I think it's unique, but still really common that any support is great support, right? So you're amazing and you're part of our toolkit. I'll speak as a type 1. You're part of our toolkit. And I've said in past retreats that I think you're as important as our insulin in many ways. So thank you.